Dude, she's finally ready. I was up till about 2 in the morning last night, getting this thing all ready for you today. And bro, we have one heck of an electrical system now. We've got our blinkers hooked up, all my switches work, starter's gonna work, brake lights are gonna work, and I'm excited.
Love it when everything works.
That's right. So we're about 98% done with the electrical. So this will probably be the last dedicated electrical video for this cart. But those of you paying real close attention may realize that this that you see here is entirely different than where we ended up last time. Once we figured out that we were gonna need diodes, thank you comment section, y'all were very helpful in that, kind of changed the game for us. So this is a diode. What this allows us to do is with DC current, it's basically a one-way valve. So current will flow through this direction, but won't flow back. And so the problems we were having was basically the kind of circuits I wanted to set up required that we have these kind of stops in there because a lot of things are connected to one another and we can't have switches back feeding to other components and stuff. Some other time, I'll show you my whole wiring diagram. I want to do a really nice one to kind of make it more clear, but I'll go back over that wiring diagram and get one really pretty to make it a little easier to follow than my chicken scratch that I used to build all of this. And you're going to be seeing a lot of electrical Tyranis tips coming up as I kind of break out the various systems here and how we went about going through all this. But before, we had the high beams and low beams on 2 separate relays. I've never really played with relays before. I thought it was gonna help us solve the high beam, low beam issue of having to use this single pole switch to accomplish that. But as we saw, it was still gonna require me to go in and put in a diode. So I could have just left it as is, but I figured we have limited space in here, obviously. So instead, brought it down to just one relay. And so let's just kind of go through and I'll give a brief high-level overview of what's going on here. So we have our auxiliary power switch now. And what this does is when I turn this on, it brings our relay online, and then our relay allows power from the battery, which is running through this circuit breaker here, to power our entire fuse box. So this switch turns on or kills the power to the entire electrical system just through this one relay like this. The reason I was trying to use a bunch of relays before was I said I wanted to not run too much current through these switches. This is all LEDs, and these switches are rated for high enough amperages that it shouldn't be a problem. The other thing that I was struggling with and why I looked so distressed was I try to do everything maintaining best practices, because if I'm gonna show it to you guys, I'd like it to be right. And the best way to wire in switches and stuff like this is you actually want your ground to be what's being switched on and off. You don't usually want to, if you can avoid it, run your actual power through the switch. So ultimately, you'd rather have power go to the lights and then the ground wire be what's broken or connected by the switch. Now, we weren't able to do that here because my taillights and my headlights have multiple power ins to turn on the various functions, but only one ground. And so there was no way I was gonna be able to manipulate all the different parts of the lights individually like that. So instead, like I said, we're not running high amperage through these wires and the switches will be just fine. So instead, power goes into our fuse box, through our fuse circuits, and into each of these switches. And each switch, when you turn it on, will send power to the various places it needs to go. In order to tackle our high beam, low beam situation, I went in and basically added a diode here that bridges the 2 positions of our 3-position switch. So off is still in the middle. Up top is letting power go to both top and bottom, which allows me to power on the light bar and the headlights down low. And then when you go into the down position, it powers only the headlights, but the diode allows it to not backfeed and also turn on our light bar. And then we've got our ring lights here for the front, which are turned on with this switch. Again, power runs in and then down to both ring lights. And again, I had to use some diodes there in order to allow me to have this switch that'll power both, but also be able to independently power left and right for our blinkers. So for the blinkers, we've got power that runs out of our fuse box into this flasher relay. And then from the flasher relay, runs through a wire and allows me to run power to both of these switches. So both of these switches, when our auxiliary power is on, both switches are hot. And then with some diode magic, I made sure that we can turn on our left turn signal, and the left light up front is gonna turn on and flash, as well as the left brake light will also flash. And then you can turn that off, turn on the right one. We'll also be able to, when we step on the brakes, both taillights light up just like brake lights. So that's all good. And then we've got this over here, this terminal block. This half of it that's all connected is just a way to organize all of my grounds for the various circuits that we have going on here. And then that gets grounded down right here, riveted to the actual plate below. And so the entire cart is grounded just like a car would be. And then I use these last two to have set up as separate independent connections so I could run all of my blinker stuff cleanly. There's probably easier ways to do it than I did, but I like making things from scratch. It's not that hard to do. It's just a little bit mind-boggling. But the reason I'm not testing all this and showing you the lights flicking on and off is because before we do that, we've got two little things to tackle. I stopped short last night because it was 2 a.m. I didn't want to be cutting welding and grinding. But this morning before you got here, I made a little tab so that I'm gonna be able to actually attach my spring switch for our brake lights. And so we'll get this welded in, hooked up. We'll put our brake caliper back on, and then we have to go through and test each circuit with the multimeter to see how much amperage it's drawing when we turn it on. That way I know what amperage fuse to put in each one of those slots. I've got a bunch of 1 amps, and I think that should be all we need, but in my just kind of swapping things around and playing with it, I did blow one of them, so we may have a couple circuits where we have maybe the light bar and the lights that we may be pulling more than 1 amp. So we'll just have to figure that out, and we'll go through, show you guys how to test that, make notes for all of our various fuses of what size we're gonna need, and then we can go through and test everything. Sound like a plan?
Let's do it, dude.
Heck yeah. Okay, so first, let's get this little guy in. I'm thinking it's gonna go right here. The seat's gonna be here. We don't want this tail getting bent or interfered with. That's gonna be out of the way, and we can loop it back around and connect in on these little connectors that I've made. I spent an exorbitant amount of time making sure that every single aspect of our electrical system is connected with these removable connectors that have been soldered in place, as well as heat shrinked to make sure we don't have any shorts. And this is gonna allow us to have a really nice time when we go and disassemble everything. It's a little tricky to see right now, but once my hand's out of the way, it's gonna be much easier for us to show you guys exactly how this is all gonna work. And I think it'll be clearer too once the spring is set up. But this is gonna allow me to run the spring over to this convenient little hole in the plunger for our master cylinder. And that's gonna allow us to actuate the brake lights with the actual brakes, which is gonna be awesome. The other reason this all took me so flipping long was I've been very, very intentional and careful about where I've run all of my wires to ensure that nothing is going to get interfered with, nothing's going to get caught on anything, and that it's all run as cleanly as possible so that when we go to take this thing apart, like probably, unfortunately, pretty soon, to send it out to powder coating, it's gonna be really easy for me to go through and wrap all of this into one really nice, beautiful wiring harness. It's gonna be easy to remove from the cart and make assembly and disassembly and troubleshooting a lot easier than if we just had some big spaghetti mess. Yeah, it takes longer, but I think it's definitely gonna be worth it. And dude, I'm just so excited to finally be able to stop thinking in terms of amperage and voltages.
Big brain stuff, bro.
Yeah, something like that. There's electricians that are gonna be crying in the comments at some of the things I've probably done wrong, but everything works while I'm down here. The only other thing that we're waiting on to really wrap up the electrical system is I thought maybe we were gonna be able to get away without running a voltage regulator on our alternator, but basically, if I go to hook this up to the battery, it's just shorting out. And that's because that voltage regulator that this is supposed to come with probably has a big 20 amp diode built into it that allows it to not backfeed and short out when touching the battery. So it's only like 20 bucks. I'll get one on order and we'll do this thing right. But all the wires are run, everything's in the right places, everything fits, everything's looking really good, and I'm super stoked. So let's fire up the welder, tack this thing in, get this all plugged up, and then we'll run around and test. Just trying to line this up so it's not gonna interfere with our seat, and also so that spring can pull as straight as possible. I think I got it. That should be sufficient for now. All right, so now our next step is to go through and I want to test all of these various circuits that we've put together that we've got attached here in our fuse block. That way I can see how much amperage each of our accessories is pulling, so that way we can get the proper fuse and make sure that we're not blowing fuses too often, or that we don't have a fuse in there that's so large that it's not going to do its job in case too much current does get to our accessories. So the way we're going to do that is I've got my multimeter here, and everything that we're going to be doing is going to be sub 10 amps, but I've got my multimeter plugged into the DC 10 amp setting over here, and we're going to roll this guy over to DC 10 amp. We'll set this where we can see it. And now what we're going to have to do is basically make a break in the circuit and basically attach our multimeter as a bridge. That way we can push power from the battery through the multimeter and then to our accessories, and we'll get a reading for how much amperage we're pulling. So first one, let's just go ahead and do the ring lights first. So I'll reach down here and I'll pull my terminal off for my ring lights, insert my black lead into the terminal in front of the circuit, and I'll take my red lead and I'm going to put it straight to the battery. So now I'll just turn on the lights. We're reading 0.39 amps to power those rings down there. So that's about 4, and that's going to be on fuse 4. Let's go ahead and make a note of that. Fuse 4 is our ring light, and we're pulling 0.4 amps. So for that one, a 1 amp fuse is going to be just fine. So I can go ahead, I'll take one of my 1 amp fuses and leave it installed right there. The rest of these, let's just pull all these out so we don't get confused. So the nice thing is I've got this fuse block with the lights in it, and that way, because I don't exactly remember where all of these things are going, I can just turn on my accessory power. So you can see here when I flip this on, it's looking for power to my brake lights on 6. So we'll go ahead, shut this down, unplug this bad boy. Again, put our black lead in on this side. There we go. And now we'll go right to the battery. You'll see that my running lights just turned on, and those are only pulling 0.02 amps to run the brake lights in the running light position, which is dimmest setting. And now Trey, I might actually have you drop the camera for a second. Can you push on the brakes for me? Yep. Okay, right there, we just jumped up to 0.17 amps. So even there, only pulling, we're gonna call that 0.2. You can let go. Nice. So that is all going through fuse 6, our brake lights. And what did we say on that? 0.2? I think we rounded up to 0.2. The smallest fuses I have right now are 1 amp. Ultimately, you'd want something closer to 0.2. I may do some research and see if I can find some of these full size. I want to say these are ATC sized blade fuses. If you guys beat me to it, drop a link to some, 500 milliamp, 250 milliamp blade fuses. I'm just not even sure that they make them that small on these big ones. But again, this is a little bit extra that we're doing all this fuse work, but I kind of like showing you guys the right way to do things, and I get a kick out of it myself. So that's looking good. Plug this back in, and for now we are totally safe putting in a 1 amp fuse there. Okay, up next, what do we got? Let's turn our power back on, again, just so I can see my lights. High and low beams are going through fuse 2, so we'll test that one next. This is the beauty of using these connectors. It allows me to do all this kind of stuff where I don't have to actually take apart connections or do anything crazy. It just comes right off, and I can put it right back on. So there we have that. Back to our battery. And now we can flick our switch into low beams first, just for ha-has. All right, that's a whole 3 amps on the lows and 6.5 amps for high and low. So that's gonna be a heaviest draw probably. 6.5 amps for our high and low beams on fuse 2. I'll see if I can get maybe a 7 amp fuse for that. But for the sake of today, so I can show you everything working, we'll toss in my back pocket 15 amp. We'll just keep making our way around. All right, flip my power back on. I can see where all these things are going. Let's do blinkers next. Both of my blinkers are gonna be on fuse 3. So I'll pull my power out from fuse 3. It's in place. Red lead back to the battery. And let's go ahead and try our blinkers. So, .2 is the highest I've seen so far. And then if we turn on both to blink, let's call this 0.6, which makes sense. So fuse 3, 0.6 amps. Again, for the time being, let's just throw a 1 amp in there, call it a day. I think all that's left is our starter, which I have on fuse 1. Got our kill switch in the down position, so our engine's not gonna start on us. Let's pull out the lead coming out of fuse 1. Maybe for our starter again on fuse 1. Let's go back to the battery. And now, you ready? We're gonna call that's about 3 amps, a little more than 3. You wanna get a look at that? 3.01. For fuse 1, this is for our starter. We are pulling 3.1 amps. And that is just to actuate the solenoid. There's a lot more current running back in the back here, but none of that comes up front. We'll throw in our 30 amp for today, just so that everything works. Plug this back up. So we've got 3 amps running through our starter, and that'll be the same for your starter if you're running a 420, 3.1 amps. So you're gonna wanna go with maybe a 4 or 5 amp fuse. I really don't know what the graduations are for these kind of fuses, so just get as close as you can. Our lights, we're gonna need to find something that's just a little bit more than 6.5 amps. So ideally, maybe there's 7, 8, but I don't know if they go 1 amp at a time or if we'll have to put a 10 there. And then blinkers is pulling just over half an amp, 0.6. That's good with a 1 amp. Our ring lights are pulling 0.4 amps. That's fine with a 1. And our brake lights, even when they're completely turned on, are only pulling 0.2 amps. So we're looking pretty good. Now, I can finally close this up for good. And the moment we've all been waiting for, let's actually test these things. All right, so check this out. Trey, you wanna come around front for a second here and take a look at our dash. Oh, one thing else that I'll point out while we're here is these switches, these like covered switches, when you turn them, they're in the down position, generally off, and when you flip them up, they turn on. But for a kill switch, basically what you're trying to do is, in order to kill the engine, there's a wire that comes out of the 420 or whatever engine you're using, and you want to ground that in order to kill the engine. It shuts off the spark. So I had to actually flip this switch around. So actually in this orientation, down, which is what I want my kill to be, is actually on. So right now this is grounding the engine to the frame. When we flip it on, it's actually gonna allow it to break that circuit instead of connect it. So that's one thing I wanted to point out. I had to do that, flip this around. It's not hard to do, but something you have to think about. So now, with this flipped up and on, we can see that our starter doesn't work until we flip up our auxiliary. And when we flip this auxiliary up, you're gonna see that our battery gauge turns on. And so with all my testing and everything we've been doing, we're sitting at about 82, 83% right now, which is not bad because I've been doing a lot of testing. But what do you say we test the starter first?
Let's see.
So here we go. Starter works. Let's test the kill switch. Kill switch works. Nice. And so now let's go ahead. Yeah, next we'll try our low beams. We got low beams. Back to off. Let's test our high beams. We got high beams. Very nice. We'll test our ring lights. Ring lights are working. Go ahead and take a look at those taillights for me. So now, as soon as I turn on the accessory power, our taillights light up. That's in the running light position. And when we press on the brakes, oh yeah.
That's so sick.
Right? Okay, last thing, since you're back there, let's test our blinkers. We'll do right blinker. There she is. Left blinker. There she is. And then if you turn them both on, you get hazards. How cool is that?
That's so sick.
Yeah, man. And I can kill it all right there, and that shuts down power to everything. So, bro, we're in the game now. As soon as I sort out the little voltage regulator diode situation to keep my alternator from trying to short the battery, this thing is ready to go. So, there's probably other ways to do some of these things. I'm sure that they make like bolt-on kits that'll handle all of the like circuitry of trying to like make it so that your brake lights work and your flashers work and all that. But like I said, I'm a stubborn boy who likes making things from scratch. And so I would wager that this is far cheaper than anything that you could possibly buy as a kit. And it's just really satisfying if you like electrical stuff like I do, to be able to figure this stuff out and make it all work. So
satisfying is how you describe this experience?
Satisfying is how I describe that experience. The entire 6 hours I spent bent over this thing killing my back yesterday was a little masochistic. All that's left up here is to actually fasten all of these loose parts down to the body of the cart. I've been waiting on that because like we said originally, we're gonna make an aluminum shroud that's gonna come in here and close all of this in so that it's nice and hidden and protected. And I figured I'd leave these things sort of floating. That way, if there's any interference issues, I can still move stuff around. But all of this is either gonna get riveted down or bolted down to this terminal block. And it's gonna be really sweet. Can we just take a quick moment, get a good look at this. Are you satisfied with your look? Okay, now come over here. That was my first attempt at an electrical system, but Big Bob's cart doesn't have turn signals, doesn't have a push to start. It's just a little different. He doesn't have the independent ring lights to control, so that removes a switch. I left space in here to put switches in case we wanted to add more stuff. I'm considering, depending on how well these alternators work, doing heated seats. That could be pretty wild. And then of course, well, should I say of course? I don't think I told you guys. Hang on.
Damn, son, where'd you find this?
Now, as pretty and as nice as this all is, there is one more big thing that's going to be added to the electrical system of these carts. It's actually right behind you. We got winches.
Let's go.
With no reverse, getting stuck on the trails or caught in a place that you can't get out of is really tricky, and we've already encountered that a couple times. So these are gonna get mounted up in here somewhere. I've got some pretty funky ideas about how I wanna do that. And I think just to keep it simple, we may just run these cables all the way back to the battery and leave this completely independent of everything else. But this will be the last big electrical component that's gonna get installed, at least on this cart. And then, ooh, you know what else would be cool? I almost forgot. Let me put the seat back in. For Christmas, Bridget got me this sick JBL speaker, and I think we're gonna make a mount for that right here. That way we can bump some tunes while we're crashing through the state forest. I was gonna try and tackle that today, but my brain needs a break, Trey. We've shot every other day this week. I don't know about you, but I am a shell of myself. It's all for you guys, but couldn't be happier. We appreciate y'all for watching and allowing us to do the things that we do. Your reactions and responses have been so fantastic. So keep smashing that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already.
You know you gotta hit those notifications.
I think we're gonna see him in the next one, right?
I think so.
Yeah, we'll see you in the next one.
Let's go.